Hello all, it's Karen here doing my poster session for Module 7, and I decided to use Google Slides, which is a part of the Google Suite with Google Drive that some of our classmates had reviewed before, and I decided to include something different that we haven't looked at in this class as a part of my poster session, just to highlight this add-on through Google Slides that I've used in the past and also, basically show it to everybody in case you want to use it in your classroom because I think it's pretty awesome. Um, the add-on that I decided to use is Pear Deck. There's a free version and there's a premium version, but either version that you use, basically, the point of Pear Deck is they have pre-created slides that are super useful when it comes to formative assessment or even just getting ideas rolling for how you're going to present things to your students or how you're going to get information from them. So I'll show you some of the slides as I go through when I'm talking about online teaching, but I decided to use Pear Deck, so all my slides are not my own, they are from Pear Deck. So thank you, Pear Deck. My philosophy of online teaching and the role of the instructor. Honestly, this has changed since this course began. I think originally I thought that my philosophy for online teaching would be extremely different than my philosophy for teaching that I currently inhabit in my brick and mortar classroom, and honestly, it's not very different at all. My philosophy has always been relationship first, that students don't want to learn from you if they don't feel like you love them and they don't feel like you accept them for who they are, flaws and all. And I feel like this is the same in an online environment. I think that we have learned a lot about community in an online environment and how important that is. And I think it's still important here um, in this new environment of teaching in the 21st century. I think the role of the instructor is a guide on the side. If the instructor is the one giving all the information, then something's wrong. So, especially in an environment where students can literally Google anything, I think as an instructor, it's even more important to reflect and think about what skills do I need to be teaching my students and how or what is the best way for them to get there or to learn that key information. And so utilizing the internet, utilizing any online tools, I think is important as an online teacher. So a question we were asked or tasked to think about was, which unit might I teach in an online environment? And I kind of added a second question to the slide, but what unit wouldn't I teach on an online environment? Honestly, I think anything that I teach right now in my 7th grade English language arts classroom, I could transfer to an online environment. Would it necessarily be easy? Not always, but it's doable. I might have to think outside of the box. It might be like a first year of teaching again. But honestly, I really think anything I teach now, I could teach in an online environment. Some logistics might need to be worked out, like, okay, if I'm teaching a novel, how does my student get the book? Are they reading it online? Do we send it to their house? Do they have to purchase it as part of the class materials? But I think it'll all be worked out. For the sake of this particular presentation and for this poster session, I decided to think about the unit of poetry. Partially just because that's what I'm currently teaching, so it's fresh on my brain. Also because in the past couple of years, I have created quite a few flipped type of activities for my poetry unit in my brick and mortar classroom. I've also created 2 different learning pathways through Schoology and using Google Docs. So I thought that these were things that could be pretty easily transferred into an online teaching environment when I'm thinking about asynchronous activities, since they're essentially almost asynchronous, even though their kids are in my classroom doing them a lot of the times, they're working at their own pace. So I think poetry would be the unit that we're going to talk about today. I also decided to include some slides in here that Pear Deck offers, so you can kind of see why I decided to display Pear Deck. Because Pear Deck is all about formative assessment. So one of the slide options is, how was the homework assignment? Oh, sorry. And students in their Google slide can slide these thumbs ups and thumbs down and tell me all about it. So that could talk about homework, but you could really do anything on there. There are other slides in Pear Deck that are all about analyzing a text or a term. And so I think that that can be helpful with poetry because I can edit anything in here. All of the text is editable. So instead of main idea, I could write poem, and then in each one of these boxes, I could have a different type of thing that students need to analyze. One could be the theme, one could be the literary devices used. And so I think that would be helpful and useful. I'll just click through a couple with a little bit less narration, knowing that I would definitely want to use some of these slides in my online unit in poetry. So we have a story map for narrative poems, illustrating the setting, or it could even say illustrate the imagery used in the poem, perspectives of characters or narrators depending on the poem, connections to our own life, always important in poetry, and how it stays relevant. Another one about connecting concepts. And so there are tons of slides like that that you can use with your students for formative assessments. The next thing that I'm going to talk a little bit about is synchronous, asynchronous, and collaborative tools if I am teaching a poetry unit in an online setting. I think that all three have a great place in teaching online, especially in teaching poetry. For a synchronous classroom environment, I would want to use that for examples of poems and for practicing analyzing. I am a big fan of the model of gradual release. Some people say that I do, we do, you do. And so it would be important for me to model for students how to do analyzation, because honestly, it's not always easy for my 7th graders, so I don't think it would be any easier for a student, whether they're online or brick and mortar classroom. So if I decide to focus on theme, or figurative language for a mini lesson, I teach students in the classroom how to analyze a poem and how best to find your figurative language and show them that. Take any questions, explain, and then maybe we do one as a class where I take volunteers. Maybe after that, I have them break out into the breakout rooms and analyze something, or maybe it's just a stanza, maybe it's not even a whole poem, as a small group, and their homework or their asynchronous work is to analyze something on their own and turn in their annotations. And so I think that that could be really powerful. I think asynchronous would be great for, honestly, taking basic notes or doing a little bit of pathway work, like I mentioned that I already have created for my brick and mortar classroom. Then my students could still do some sort of learning pathway asynchronously, and then we could talk about it when we're together in class. I think that that would be a really good use of time. Collaboration tools, I think Flipgrid could honestly be a great one, or even a Triventi, or some sort of quizzes or Quizlet or Kahoot. On Triventi, it gives, which is basically like an online quiz tool, it gives students the options to collaborate on quizzes. So they could create multiple choice quiz for their peers to take during class time, during synchronous class time, as a fun game. And the students could create their own questions though, and ask questions about figurative language, about literary devices, about maybe a poem that we read together in class. So I think that could be really fun for students. For Flipgrid, students could record themselves reading a poem of their own, reading aloud a poem that they found that was meaningful to them in a poetry slam type of activity, or even analyzing a poem and explaining the real world connections that they can make to the poem. How might we manage and assess within the online classroom? I think managing behavior is going to come down to good relationships with families. I think that if I am in contact with the families early on, if a student is not participating, is not logging in when they're supposed to be logging in or completing their work, instead of reading a laundry list of names at the end of my lesson saying, hey, you're missing this, I think that emailing and calling or conferencing with parents and students would be extremely important to managing that aspect. Assessment, I think, is important to do every single day, and that's part of the reason why I included Pear Deck as a part of my poster session, because I think that a formative assessment would have to be at the center of everything that I do as an online teacher, because I wouldn't get some of those nonverbal cues that you get in a regular classroom to see which kids are getting it and which kids are really struggling. So I would want them to complete something like a ticket out the door pretty much every day. So that every day I could take 20, 30 minutes after the lesson and just quickly read through or look through what the students did for their formative assessment for the day. And that would give me a good snapshot of where they were and what I need to do the next day. I think that when managing an online classroom, if I have completed all my lesson plans for the next month and I do them exactly planned to the plan that I made a month out, then I'm probably not doing my job well because I'm not assessing my students regularly and meeting them where they are and meeting all of their needs. My aha moments throughout this class are numerous. Prep time, I feel like I didn't realize how long it would take to prep, and so thinking about the fact that an online classroom, teaching there, if I went into that, it would basically be like a first year teaching, was eye-opening. Small group rooms were another aha moment. I didn't even realize that that was available in something like Zoom that we took a look at, and I think that that is a really powerful space for students to connect and build community within their small classroom. Building relationships has always been important to me as an educator, so just knowing that that's continued in an online environment was a big aha because I didn't really realize that. I thought that that would go away because I've seen that go away in classrooms that I've been a part of in my graduate studies. The social presence model was probably the biggest aha for me. The fact that, students' involvement with the instructor and the intensity of the interactions and the community impacts student motivation so much is something that I knew for a brick and mortar classroom as well, but it just kind of solidified some things that I had already thought prior to starting this class. And even just understanding the barriers that students think exist between them and a teacher and trying to overcome them, I think was really powerful to read about and hear about when we looked at that. Accessibility was another one. I honestly thought that a lot of my assessments were a lot more accessible than they actually are. So knowing that I would have some work to do, and I do have some work to do on accessibility, was an aha moment and kind of a little bit disheartening because I thought I was doing pretty well, and then I realized, oh shoot, I'm not doing anything with these images so that my students understand, or ooh, I didn't use the official listing or the official bullet points, and that could have helped a student who needs some help being able to see things or using a reader to see things. So knowing that I'm going to have some work to do, that was a little bit of an aha. Some questions that I still have. How are we addressing digital citizenship in online classroom? I feel like that would be extremely important. I have a student who talks about her friends online, and when I dug in a little bit deeper and talked to her a little bit more, I realized that these are people that she's never met in her entire life, and she shares intimate details about her life with them, and I just feel like that's a little bit scary to me. It doesn't really feel safe. So how are we addressing that? How are we addressing plagiarism? How are we addressing the good old copy-paste? Is there a separate class for this? Is there a way for us to integrate this within all of our subject matters? But I think that that's important for us to teach our students, especially because they're using the internet and search engines so often, and especially even within the course of an online class. What are the long-term social impacts for students? I think that's an important one for us to address and really think about, and we're really only going to know that after some more research is done because online schooling is fairly new compared to brick and mortar school. But I will say I think that when I'm in the traditional classroom, I am looking out for my students' well-being socially as well and trying to get them involved in clubs and things like that. And I can't really see the connection for an online classroom. So I guess I'm still kind of wondering about that. And the last one is, how are teachers getting trained when they get a teaching job, teaching in an online environment? Or are they getting extra training? Because like I said before, I think I would be like a first-year teacher if I was an online teacher and starting that, even though I have 8 years experience. So I'm just wondering, is there any extra training or consideration to the online teaching environment, teachers getting the proper training so that they're giving effective lessons, that they're using the tools available to them well? Those are my thoughts. I have really enjoyed this course and getting to know everybody. I hope you enjoyed listening to my poster session. If you've gotten this far, congratulations. I hope you guys have a great rest of your school year. And yeah, I'll see you in the comments.